Welcome back to our series on the images of God. Last week we introduced the image of God as the cosmic clockmaker, the idea that God creates all things and brings forth life into existence. This image of God as the creator is imperative. It's foundational in Scripture. Indeed, before we understand anything else about God, if we're just reading the Bible straight through, we know that God is the creator of all things. Before we know about the God who liberates the oppressed, before we know about the God who makes covenants and keeps God's promises, before we know about the God who is willing and able to raise the dead, we know that God is the creator of all things. And this is not just a Genesis story. The image of God as the creator is found in both the Old and the New Testaments. We have lots and lots of stories and references to God as the creator. It's foundational to our faith for a variety of reasons, but I'm going to name just one for today. One that was cemented into me a long, long time ago when I was a camp counselor at Sky Ranch Lutheran Bible Camp just outside of Fort Collins, Colorado. Most weeks, I was a typical camp counselor, doing all the things that a typical camp counselor does. Taking kids on high ropes courses, taking them on hikes, playing more games than you can possibly count, and hopefully sneaking in a couple Bible studies every so often. But my favorite week was the week that we didn't have any campers. And I know that doesn't sound like a great camp counselor thing to say, but it was a glorious week. 10 of us were allowed to go out on trail for the entire week and do a conservation program. Somehow the camp had some sort of agreement with Rocky Mountain National Park that we were allowed to do trail maintenance. The camp was compensated, we got paid, and frankly we had a week off from all those 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And so I spent this week out in the middle of Rocky Mountain National Park doing trail maintenance, and I still remember the second night. The second night, we had just made camp for the day. The sun had not yet set, and a few of us decided to go peak the mountain. We were very close to the top. We were almost at tree line where we were camping, so we went up above to the very top of the mountain. And at this point in the summer, I had been on a variety of mountains, but I'd never been on something this high before. So I got to the top, and it was glorious. It was one of those moments that I will never forget. The sun was setting behind me, and I looked out, and while I was still standing in the sun, the space below me was already in darkness. And there was a town there. I think it was Fort Collins, but I'm not 100% certain. But when I looked down, I had this moment, and it sounds ridiculous to even say, but the truth is I had this moment of pride. I saw the lights of the city, the street lights, the car lights, the lights in the houses, and it was beautiful. Everything else was dark, and you saw the lights of this city that looked like it was coming alive. And in that moment, I had this moment of pride, thinking, that's what we have done. As humanity, this is what we have created. Now, to be sure, I didn't create any of those cars. I didn't build any of those houses. I know this sounds ridiculous, but this moment of pride of saying, this is what humanity is capable of. In the middle of Colorado, this rocky terrain, humanity is capable of doing these extraordinary things. Look what we built. It's beautiful. It is glorious. And as I stood there in silence, one of the people who had climbed the mountain with me, I heard her say, "Wow." And I turned to her as if to agree when I realized that she, along with the other people in our party, were facing the other direction. In that moment, I turned away from the most beautiful thing one of the most beautiful things I'd ever seen humans create. I turned to see what they were all staring at. And it was the sun setting over the mountains. And in that moment, the sky was filled with more colors than I can possibly explain. And the mountains, the very tops of them lit up. And more memorable than even all of these images were the images of light and darkness. As the light would go from the sun was going down, it would pass through different parts of the mountain range, and it was like the light and the darkness were chasing each other back and forth. And in that moment, I was rendered speechless. In the span of 60 seconds, I saw what humanity is capable of, and it is glorious. Humanity is capable of great and powerful and wonderful and beautiful things. And yet, compared to what the creator of the universe is able to do, it's not even a fair comparison. It's not apples to oranges. It's like an apple to a lifetime supply of donuts, okay? There's just no comparison. And I remember what this moment did to me. It just left me in awe. It rendered me speechless. And in that moment, I felt very small, and not in a bad way. Small in this beautiful way, small in the sense that there is something so much bigger, so much greater than me, that is in control of the world. And frankly, friends, we need this. We need these moments where we are left in awe of the power and the glory of God. Because the truth is, on our best days and on our worst days, we can get caught up in our own stuff, whether it's our successes or our challenges. We can begin to think that the world revolves completely around us. But when we have one of these moments where we are able to see the power and the glory of God through creation, it helps put everything in perspective. It reminds us the world doesn't revolve around us, and frankly, that's awfully liberating. It's something we need. It's why the image of God as the creator is so vitally important to our faith. And yet, we can't have that be our only image of God. There's a yes to this metaphor. There's lots of strong yeses to this metaphor, but there's also a no. A no that is so powerful and yet so tempting that Christians throughout the centuries have fallen into this trap. It's happened so often, we actually have a specific name for it. It's called Deism. When we fall into the trap of Deism, it makes God impersonal, cold, aloof. Deism starts like the Christian story. It sounds really good. We think of that cosmic clockmaker again, where God would take all the parts to make a clock, the big and the small, and form them together just so and wind them up in order for the clock to function. It's how we would think of creation, that God calls forth life by doing all the big and small things necessary, that God is in the big things of how hot the sun must be to produce life on the earth. And at the same time, God is caught up in the details as well, distinguishing one type of fish in the ocean versus one type of fish in the lakes. I mean, God is involved in all of these things. As Christians, we believe this part of the story. And yet, where Deism makes the mistake, Deism says that once God has wound up creation, once God has started the earth spinning on its axis, once God has wound up that clock, then God steps back, hangs it on the wall, and chooses not to interact with it any longer. This is so tempting for Christians and has been for 2,000 years because on one level it makes sense that God would create all things and then that God would step back. For those who have trouble with miracles, for those who don't understand or haven't had experiences with God in a personal way, this seems to make sense. And yet, friends, this is not the Christian story. The Christian story is about a God who, yes, calls forth life, in which God takes so much delight that God continues to interact with the world in a variety of ways, which we see most clearly in the incarnation. Yes, we believe in the God of creation, but we also believe in the God of the incarnation, the God who comes close to us in the person of Jesus Christ, who is born to Mary and Joseph, who lies in a lowly manger. That's who God is. God is both the creator of the universe, and God becomes a vulnerable little child in order to be close to us. God is one who leaves us awe-inspired, and God is also one who comes so close to us that we get to hug him tight, to hold him in our arms. I know the image of God as a cosmic teddy bear probably isn't the most helpful on a variety of levels, but the image of God coming so close that we get to hold him, it is something foundational to the Christian faith that we need to remember this day. So what we invite you to do is to have a conversation today about these two images. God is the cosmic clockmaker, God is the creator of all things, and at the same time, the God is the cosmic teddy bear, is the God who in the person of Jesus has come so close to each and every one of us. Thanks for joining us. We hope you have a great discussion.